Late October 732, between Poitiers and Tours, two armies faced each other. On one side stood the Muslims, led by an experienced commander, al-Rahman. In European chronicles, he was usually called simply Abdirahman. Opposing them were the Franks. Their leader, Charles Martel, had assembled what was likely the largest army of the Christian West in order to defend the kingdom. For an entire week, neither side dared to attack. The armies observed one another, studied their opponents, and gathered reserves. What lay ahead was not merely a skirmish, but a battle for the future of Europe. Islam is the youngest of the monotheistic religions. It emerged amid the sands of the Arabian desert. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the Arabs began a rapid expansion. Under their blows, the Persian state, the Sasanian Empire, collapsed, while Byzantium lost most of its territories. Advancing across North Africa, Arab armies reached the Atlantic Ocean. The conquered lands were called the Maghreb. Arab cities such as Kairouan quickly arose there, attracting settlers from Arabia. In 711, Arab forces under the command of Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the Strait of Gibraltar. They defeated the Visigothic army at the Battle of Guadalete, and within 8 years conquered nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula. In the conquered territories, the Arabs imposed their own order and levied the jizya, a special tax on non-Muslims. Only the mountainous regions in the north remained under Christian control, where stubborn resistance to the conquerors persisted. The Muslims called the conquered lands of Spain al-Andalus, a name derived from the Vandals, remnants of whose people still lived in the south of the peninsula. In 717, Arab forces crossed the Pyrenees for the first time and mercilessly plundered the borderlands of Septimania. In 719, they besieged and captured Narbonne, establishing control over the region. Arab commanders had no intention of stopping there. In 721, forces led by the Andalusian governor al-Sam invaded Aquitaine and laid siege to Toulouse. The Aquitanian Duke Odo had left the city in advance to gather troops. The inhabitants of Toulouse endured a 3-month siege. During that time, Odo assembled an army and struck the besiegers from the rear. The Muslims, unprepared for battle, began to retreat. Al-Sam was killed in the fighting, and the withdrawal turned into a panic-stricken flight. One of the junior commanders, Abd al-Rahman, then took command. He organized the retreat and repelled the pursuit by Aquitanian cavalry, saving the army from complete destruction. Military historians emphasize that even under favorable conditions, an orderly retreat is extremely difficult, and in the 8th century, it was almost an art form. These episodes testify to Abd al-Rahman's talent as a commander. The victory brought Odo recognition. He received honors from Rome, and the Pope bestowed upon him the title the Great. Yet the Muslim threat did not disappear. Unable to conquer Frankish lands outright, Arab forces turned to systematic plundering. Such raids were called razzia. They occurred almost annually, with Aquitaine and Burgundy suffering the most. The most famous razzia took place in 725. That year, Arab forces under the governor Anbasa ibn Suhaim al-Kalbi reached Autun and sacked it. Frankish chroniclers even claimed that some Arab detachments reached the outskirts of Paris, devastating nearby villages. While retreating and crossing the Rhone, Anbasa was killed in an ambush set by local Burgundians. Arab raids against Christians continued the following year as well. By 730, the Arabs had plundered Rodez, Gévaudan, and Velay. They looted churches, burned villages, and took captives into slavery. Soon, cities and fortresses such as Nîmes, Avignon, and Carcassonne came under Muslim control. At that time, the Frankish kingdom was experiencing difficult years. Formally, it was ruled by kings of the Merovingian dynasty. In reality, power belonged to the administrators of the royal palace, the mayors of the palace, Latin major domus. Because several Merovingian kings ruled simultaneously, the Frankish realm fragmented into smaller kingdoms: Austrasia, Neustria, Burgundy, and Aquitaine, each with its own king and mayor of the palace. The strongest of these was Austrasia, the original homeland of the Franks. In 680, Pepin of Herstal became mayor of the palace there. Over the next 10 years, through war and intrigue, he reunited all the Frankish realms under the crown of a single king, Theuderic III, ruling in his name. Pepin's legitimate sons died during his lifetime. When Pepin himself died in 714, a struggle for power erupted, and the Frankish realm fragmented once more. Among the claimants was Pepin's illegitimate son Charles, later nicknamed Martel, meaning the hammer. At the beginning of the conflict, Charles's chances were slim. He lacked sufficient forces and was soon imprisoned in Cologne by his stepmother Plectrude. Nevertheless, the following year, Charles escaped. He hid in the Ardennes forests, where he managed to gather his own army. According to legend, Bishop Milo of Trier helped him by persuading the local nobility to support Charles. Milo later became Charles's ally, brother-in-law, and even Archbishop of Reims. Over the next 2 years, Charles Martel twice defeated the Neustrian army, at the Battle of Amblève and the Battle of Vinci, both led on the Neustrian side by Ragenfried. He also captured Cologne and established control over all of Austrasia. Thus, through military and political talent, Charles Martel rose from a former prisoner to mayor of the Palace of Austrasia and the leading contender for power among the Franks. Ragenfried, however, did not surrender. He allied himself with Duke Odo of Aquitaine and marched north to defeat Charles. The two armies met near Soissons. The battle lasted all day. Charles Martel prevailed when the Aquitanians broke and fled, followed by the Neustrians. Ragenfried took refuge in Anjou, where he held out under siege for another year before finally surrendering. In this way, Charles Martel subdued Neustria. In Burgundy, which had already lost its independence, he appointed his half-brother Childebrand as governor. Although nothing prevented Charles from conquering Aquitaine as well, the death of the puppet king Clothar IV changed the situation. The Merovingian dynasty was dying out, and Charles needed a new king. He therefore turned to Odo the Great, with whom another Merovingian king, Chilperic II, had taken refuge. Odo agreed to recognize the puppet king in exchange for peace with Charles. Thus, Chilperic II became king of all the Franks. Formally, Aquitaine belonged to his realm, but in reality, all power there rested with Duke Odo. Odo's origins remain debated. Some scholars believe he came from a cadet branch of the Merovingians. Others argue he descended from the local elite, with Basque, Gallic, or Frankish roots. After his agreement with Charles, Odo focused on strengthening his lands. 2 years after the Battle of Soissons, the siege of Toulouse, already described, took place. Arab raids into Aquitaine became more frequent and increasingly destructive. Seeking a solution, Odo took a step that shocked his contemporaries. He formed an alliance with a Muslim commander, Uthman ibn Naisa, better known in European chronicles as Munuza. A Berber by origin, Munuza ruled the northern lands of al-Andalus, with the capital of Cerdagne, and had long-standing conflicts with Arab governors. He therefore agreed to a secret alliance against the governor of Cordoba. According to legend, during one of the raids, Munuza abducted Odo's daughter Lampegia. Captivated by her beauty, he refused to return her even for a great ransom. Odo then himself proposed an alliance and Lampegia's marriage in return for Munuza's revolt against the Arabs. Modern historians agree that the alliance was purely political. The situation in Al-Andalus was indeed unstable. In the first 20 years of Arab rule, 14 governors came and went, 4 in 728 alone. Arab chroniclers accused all of them of bribery, embezzlement, and arbitrariness, fueling unrest in the garrisons. In early 731, Uthman ibn Naisa raised an army, rebelled against the governor of Cordoba, and proclaimed himself an independent ruler. Abd al-Rahman became governor of Al-Andalus in 729. His predecessor had been executed for embezzling the treasury. Abd al-Rahman himself enjoyed a reputation as a modest and prudent ruler. According to legend, he spent 2 years traveling the country, listening to the complaints of all who wished to speak. Yet, the revolt in Sardinia broke out during his rule. He reacted swiftly, gathering troops and marching north to besiege the rebel emir in his capital. Uthman ibn Naisa attempted to break out. The sources diverge. One version claims he was killed during the breakout. Another says he escaped, fought on as a guerrilla, and finally hurled himself from a cliff to avoid capture. If Munuza expected help from Duke Odo, he could not receive it. While Abd al-Rahman crushed the revolt, war raged north of the Pyrenees. Charles Martel crossed the Loire and captured Bourges. Odo retook the city, but Charles crossed the river again, sacked Bourges and the surrounding lands. Odo was forced to concentrate his forces in the north to defend his domain from Martel. Meanwhile, Abd al-Rahman did not disband his army. He established himself in Pamplona and throughout the summer of 732 gathered troops there. Chroniclers give wildly varying figures, up to a fantastical 400,000 men. Modern historians estimate the Muslim army at around 30,000 warriors, an enormous force for the 8th century. The army consisted of Arab and Berber contingents, both renowned as skilled horsemen. Cavalry, therefore, formed the core striking force. This army is commonly referred to as Arab. Even so, modern historical research shows that Arabs in Al-Andalus were relatively few, roughly 1 Arab warrior for every 9 Berbers. Thus, the vast majority of the army did not come from Arabia, but from North Africa, primarily the northern Sahara. The small infantry contingent consisted mainly of Mozarebs, Spanish Christians who served the Muslims as mercenaries. Eventually, Abd al-Rahman decided to invade Aquitaine. He sent part of his forces to Septimania, from where Muslim detachments were to carry out raiding attacks on neighboring lands, diverting the attention of Duke Odo. With his main forces, the governor set out on campaign in early autumn. The timing was not accidental. The harvest had just been completed, meaning more men could be mobilized. Moreover, the Aquitanian peasants had gathered their crops, which the invading army could seize to sustain itself. After crossing the Pyrenees, the Muslims entered Aquitaine. Duke Odo moved to meet them. The Arabs had already managed to sack and destroy Bordeaux. It was near the Garonne River that the two armies confronted each other, standing on opposite banks. Abd al-Rahman resorted to deception. He sent part of his army downstream to the right bank. Hearing of this, Odo rushed toward that force, believing the main battle would occur there. Meanwhile, the rest of the Muslim army crossed upstream, trapping the Aquitanian forces in a pincer. Surrounded on all sides, the Aquitanians suffered a crushing defeat. Odo himself escaped by fleeing the battlefield. Thus, Abd al-Rahman crushed the Duke of Aquitaine, who had defeated the Muslims at Toulouse 11 years earlier. He completely destroyed the Aquitanian army, leaving the entire region defenseless. Muslim detachments plundered the land for a month. Arab chroniclers preserve a curious story about an unnamed Aquitanian count who waged a guerrilla war against the Muslims near Libourne. Some authors claimed this was Odo himself with surviving warriors, a pseudo-Odo. He attacked supply trains, laid ambushes, and struck the camp unexpectedly. Eventually, Abd al-Rahman arrived in person, swiftly surrounded the force, and destroyed it. According to legend, the governor distributed all the captured booty among his soldiers and kept not a single coin for himself. After plundering these lands, the Arabs moved north toward Poitiers. It is not known with certainty whether the Muslim forces managed to capture the city itself. The chronicles offer contradictory accounts. What is known for sure, though, is that they looted and burned the church of Saint-Hilaire, located outside the city walls. A legend recorded in European chronicles is associated with this region. According to it, at that very time, a Breton bishop named Gratian was returning from Rome through Aquitaine, accompanied by pilgrims. Near this place, he was allegedly intercepted by Muslim warriors, who killed and robbed the bishop and his companions. According to another version, however, Gratian was killed by Germanic pagans or Viking Norsemen. Depending on the variant of the legend, these events are dated anywhere between the 5th and the 10th centuries. After ravaging the lands of Poitou, Abd al-Rahman continued north. Near Tours stood the Abbey of Saint Martin of Tours, famous for its wealth. Saint Martin himself was regarded as one of the principal patrons of the Frankish kingdom. It was, therefore, toward this sanctuary that the Muslim army advanced, intending to plunder it as well. After his defeat near Bordeaux, Duke Odo found himself in a desperate situation. He had lost almost everything in that battle, yet he was not prepared to lay down his arms. With no other option remaining, he turned for help to his recent enemy, Charles Martel. Odo sent envoys to the Frankish mayor of the palace, asking him to oppose the Muslims. Charles agreed, but insisted that an immediate campaign would be a mistake. He argued that Abd al-Rahman's forces were still too strong and could easily withdraw and impose battle on favorable terms. Instead, he believed it wiser to wait until the enemy was burdened with booty and forced to move more slowly through Aquitaine. Despite these reservations, Charles began to gather an army. It included not only Franks from the three kingdoms, but also dependent peoples: Frisians, Alemanni, Saxons, Thuringians, and Bavarians. Charles levied tribute upon them, and when necessary, demanded warriors for military service. According to legend, part of the funds used to hire additional forces came from the church, either from local bishops or even from the Pope himself. Still, modern historians doubt that this was actually the case. All of this enabled Charles Martel to assemble a large army. Its exact size is unknown. European chronicles do not mention numbers, while Arab sources give wildly differing figures, sometimes up to 200,000 warriors. Modern historians tend to believe that the Frankish army was smaller than the Muslim one, approximately 20,000 men. The Frankish army consisted of two main components. Its core was formed by professional warriors from the nobility, the so-called loida, well-armed and well-organized. The remainder consisted of a general levy. At the time, every free man had the right to join the host. This militia was numerous but poorly equipped. The Franks' greatest weakness remained their lack of cavalry. Only the wealthiest loida could afford to fight on horseback. Even after assembling his forces, Charles Martel still hesitated to begin the campaign. Only when Duke Odo arrived in person and swore vassal homage to Charles did Martel decide to march against the Muslims. In this way, he achieved a political victory over Odo. But now, he had to confront the army of Abd al-Rahman. The Franks advanced along an old Roman road and crossed the Loire near Orléans. From there, Charles turned toward Tours in order to save the Basilica of Saint Martin of Tours from plunder. At that very moment, the Muslims were devastating the surroundings of Poitiers. 12 leagues from Tours, Martel left the road and led his army across open country. Although this route was more difficult and longer, it allowed the Franks to approach unnoticed. Indeed, Arab reconnaissance failed to detect their movement. The exact location of the battle remains unknown. The chronicles provide only indirect references: the Abbey of Saint Martin, the Forest of Moulières, where reserves may have been stationed, and the Roman road from Poitiers to Tours, which Muslim sources called Balat al-Shuhada. Various hypotheses and interpretations have merely expanded the possible search area. The most likely site is considered to be the plain near Musée-la-Bataille. Even in the 20th century, local inhabitants told legends about this place, that a great battle had once been fought there. Many warriors had perished, and ever since the valley had been cursed, with all who entered it doomed to die. Today, an open-air museum dedicated to the Battle of Poitiers stands there. Archaeologists have indeed discovered artifacts on the plain near Musée-la-Bataille that may have belonged to Muslim warriors. The most famous find is the burial of a noble Arab on the Pinay Hill. Some researchers have even suggested that this might be the grave of al-Rahman himself. Nearby place names such as the Turn of the Five Moors and the King's Grave further testify to the ancient presence of a Muslim army in this region. Charles Martel understood that defeating cavalry in open terrain was impossible. His only chance lay in occupying high ground that would neutralize the force of a cavalry charge. The Franks therefore positioned themselves on a hill, forming a tightly packed shield wall. Part of the army was left in a nearby forest as a concealed reserve. The remnants of the Aquitanian army, together with Duke Odo, also stood in reserve. Why Charles did not integrate the Aquitanians into his main battle line remains unknown. Information about Martel's army is scarce. The chronicles mention that the mayor's brother, Childebrand, commanded the Burgundian contingents, which, according to the custom of the time, held a flank position. There are also references to the participation of Archbishop Milo, likely serving as a commander as well. Even less is known about the Muslim army. The encounter with the Franks came as a surprise, yet the Muslims had time to establish a camp and form up. According to Arab military tradition, the army was divided into 5 divisions, each led by its own commander. Meanwhile, the infantry of al-Rahman guarded the camp containing the plundered booty. After their encounter, both armies stood facing each other for an entire week. Neither side dared to attack first. Minor skirmishes took place while commanders concentrated their forces. Rahman recalled raiding detachments from the countryside, and Charles Martel brought up additional militia. On Saturday, October 25th, when Ramadan, the Muslim month of fasting, began, Rahman ordered the cavalry to attack. On the other hand, the positions chosen by Charles made the Frankish defense exceptionally strong. Arab horsemen charging uphill lost momentum, collided with the dense Frankish formation, and were forced to continue the fight on foot. The Franks held their formation firmly, heroically repelling attack after attack. A shield wall derives its strength from unity, and breaking it is extraordinarily difficult. The carefully chosen terrain nullified the Muslims' advantages. It is therefore unsurprising that Arab chroniclers compared the Frankish formation to a wall of ice, impossible to move. Several times, small Arab detachments managed to break through the enemy line, but Charles Martel immediately committed his reserves and restored the formation. This continued until evening. Then, al-Rahman noticed a weakness on the enemy flank, where the militia stood. He personally led an attack against this sector and succeeded in breaching the shield wall. For such a formation, loss of cohesion was close to defeat. Charles Martel therefore threw his reserves into the fight and personally led a counterattack. On the flank, the best troops of both sides clashed. Yet the Franks were unable to stop the Muslim breakthrough, and the threat of defeat loomed. At this critical moment, the Franks resorted to a ruse. In reserve, they still had a small cavalry detachment. Bypassing the Arabs on the flank, these horsemen rode straight toward the Muslim camp. Whose idea this was is unknown. Some chronicles attribute the plan to Charles Martel, others to Duke Odo the Great. In any case, the Frankish cavalry captured the enemy camp. When the Muslims learned that their camp had fallen, they rushed back to save it, for it contained the booty they had plundered. al-Rahman, who was then in the thick of the fighting and unable to control the entire army, still tried to hold the formation and continue the battle. But once it became clear that the attack had failed, he ordered a retreat. The Franks descended from the hill and launched a counterattack, pursuing and cutting down the fleeing enemy. Muslim horsemen managed to retake their camp and push back the Frankish cavalry. Nevertheless, near the camp, the commander who was covering the retreat was surrounded by Franks. According to some Arab chronicles, he fought to the last and was killed by an arrow. According to certain European accounts, he engaged in single combat with Charles Martel and fell beneath the blow of his axe. Night fell, making further fighting difficult. The Franks stood on open ground, and another cavalry attack could have reversed the outcome. Aware of this danger, Charles ordered the army to return to the hill. In the Muslim camp, the mood was one of defeat. Their commander was dead. It is unknown who replaced him, but the new leader decided not to continue the battle. During the night, the Muslims crossed to the left bank of the Clain River. To conceal their withdrawal, they lit campfires, leaving behind tents and some horses. In the morning, scouts reported to Charles Martel that the camp was empty. Nevertheless, he ordered the army to remain in position, suspecting an ambush. Only by evening did it become clear that the Muslims had truly withdrawn. It was too late to pursue them, so the Franks collected the trophies and returned home. Meanwhile, the Muslim forces reached the road of Saint-Hilaire and followed Roman roads toward Narbonne. In the south, they plundered a number of roadside towns, Velay, Gévaudan, Rodez, and Cahors, as well as the surrounding villages. The first city to greet Charles Martel in triumph was Orléans. According to tradition, the mayor of the palace even donated his sword to the local cathedral, where it was preserved as a relic. The chronicles also mention that Charles expelled Bishop Eucherius of Orléans, with whom he had a long-standing land dispute. Overall, after the victory, relations between Charles Martel and the church deteriorated. Having recognized the effectiveness of Muslim heavy cavalry, he sought to create a similar force. Lacking sufficient funds, he decided to grant land to his warriors on the condition that they serve as mounted soldiers, fully equipped. When his own lands were exhausted, he began confiscating church estates and distributing them. This entered history as the beneficiary reform, often regarded as the beginning of the age of knighthood in Europe. Modern historiography still debates whether Abd al-Rahman's campaign was an attempt at conquest or merely a large-scale raiding expedition. It should be remembered that in war, true objectives are often formulated on the move, depending on circumstances. If an army sets out on a campaign of conquest but suffers defeat in a decisive battle, it can always be claimed that the goal was merely to plunder borderlands. Conversely, a successful raid can easily turn into expansion if the victors are able to bring up reserves and consolidate their success. For Al-Andalus, the Battle of Poitiers itself changed very little. Already the following year, a new governor arrived in Córdoba, Abd al-Malik ibn Qatan al-Fihri, and organized a raiding expedition into the Rhone Valley, where Muslim forces once again devastated Burgundian cities. At the same time, the Frankish victory significantly boosted Christian morale in the Pyrenees. It was then that the Basques briefly retook Pamplona, aided, according to French chronicles, by Aquitanians or Franks. In 735, Muslims and Franks once again clashed in a war for Provence. Despite the grandeur of the victory, the Battle of Poitiers did not end the confrontation. Charles Martel, his son, his grandson, and even his great-grandson were forced to continue the struggle with al-Andalus. Only over time did the leading role in this conflict pass to the small Spanish kingdoms, which carried out their reconquista until the 15th century.